Welcome back. You're watching the India Development Debate, and we're focusing on what's going on in Afghanistan, where protesters are taking to the streets in Kabul. Women are leading many of these protests and standing up to the Taliban, demanding their rights. There are reports filtering in of journalists covering this being detained by the Taliban, of protesters also being detained. Meanwhile, a caretaker government was announced yesterday. The caretaker prime minister is Mullah Hasan Akhund, who is now under UN sanctions for his role when the Taliban last ruled Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001. Sirajuddin Haqqani, for example, another controversial name in that cabinet, is Interior Minister. He is leader of the Haqqani Network and on FBI's most wanted list. The Haqqani Network is a known terrorist organization. So how will the world deal with this? Sushant Sareen is joining us. Sushant, so several countries, notably in the European Union, had said that we will deal with you only if your government fulfill certain conditions, including, it should be inclusive, etc., and represent everyone. Clearly, the Taliban 2.0 is a sham. It's exactly the same. So how do you think the world will respond, and what are your thoughts on what we've seen so far of this caretaker government?
So, Tamanna, one, I think the definition of the world, of what the word inclusive is very different from the way the Taliban defined it. And frankly, nobody has really defined what exactly do they mean by inclusive. Does it mean that every ethnicity and every minority group and everybody needs to get representation? But what is the worth of that representation if they will only have a token presence? And if they thought that the Taliban will bring in other opposition groups to make some kind of a national government, and that would be, fitting the definition of inclusivity, I think they were clearly delusional. That was never going to happen. The victors do not share the spoils with the losers. So frankly, this whole, tamasha over this word inclusive doesn't make any sense to me. On the issue of how the world will deal with this cabinet or this rogues gallery, because virtually every man was a wanted man, either UN designated or by the Americans or even otherwise wanted. So I think the world probably will deal with them with a fair bit of cynicism. We are seeing that cynicism from the Americans, for example. When you have the US State Department say that, they are very concerned that there are no women in the cabinet, when a virtual who's who of the most wanted of the FBI and the UN is part of that cabinet, the State Department of the United States of America is more worried that there's no woman representation in the cabinet. That tells you that they don't give a damn as far as the terrorist designations are concerned anymore. Terrorism, at least the one which Haqqani Network or the Taliban are responsible for, or even the Al-Qaeda for that matter, is something which the Americans have, dusted their hands off, washed their hands off. They don't care anymore. That is the impression I get when I see a statement like that, rather than, what one would have expected, outrage. You don't see it. Have you seen that outrage? Anybody else?
Are you saying that the Taliban... No, not at all, actually. And so are you saying effectively the Taliban has moved one step further towards legitimacy and recognition? And if the United States is taking this stance, then sooner or later most of the world will probably follow. Are you saying there will be a situation where the Taliban will be normalized?
I think so. I think that is the calculation, because clearly the Taliban don't care a damn what the world thinks of them. They feel that the world will have absolutely no option but to come to them and have to, in a sense, either accord them some degree of recognition, legitimacy, or at least pump in money to make sure that, they keep a lid over all the terrorists which are going to be there in Afghanistan under the Taliban dispensation. So I think that is the Taliban game plan. The Americans seem to be reconciled to this. Don't forget, Tamanna, and very often, we people have memories of goldfish. But 25 years back when the Taliban came into power in 1996, the Americans were very ready to jump into bed with them. They had absolutely no problems with what the Taliban stood for. they didn't care at all. They wanted their pipelines and their business deals and what have you. It was only after the atrocities of the Taliban, the kind of treatment they meted out to women, especially to a European Union diplomat who had gone out there, that is when, all hell broke loose in Europe as well as in America. And then the Americans found it difficult to be able to handle the Taliban. Otherwise, the Americans were calling Taliban delegations to the United States, taking them to Disneyland. I don't know why we seem to have forgotten, that part. And that was also a progressive, human rights oriented, democratic dispensation under Bill Clinton. And now you have Mr. Biden.
No, you're right. This normalization has and then it actually also, a lot of it started under the Trump regime. Okay, let's look at this in the Indian context, Sushant. We've been tight-lipped and played our cards very close to our chest so far. Our focus till a few days back was, let's get our people out. We're not saying much right now, but the fact is that this Taliban-run government is very close and many believe is a proxy for the Pakistan's ISI. How will India deal with them?
Look, I think we need to again re-examine the way we, put these questions. What do we mean when we say that we have to deal with them? We don't necessarily have to deal with them. What does Afghanistan bring to the table for us? I think the Afghans need to deal with us much more than we need to deal with them. We are a market for them. What are they a market for? What is the size of that market? In any case, our access to them is pretty limited. That is one. Secondly, I think we don't have too many cards to play right now. One, I think there is this thing that, you need to get whatever people are left in Afghanistan, you need to bring them out. So you're keeping quiet about it. You don't want to rattle the cage too much. Secondly, you are waiting for your opportunities to open up. You don't have access into Afghanistan right now because I'm not sure whether the Iranians or the Uzbeks or the Tajiks are ready to give you that access right now, assuming that you wanted it. But suddenly you see over the last 2 or 3 days, the kind of noises which are coming from Iran, which was pretty comfortable with the Taliban over the last couple of years, has suddenly started making certain statements which seem to suggest that all is not well, that they're pushing the envelope. And understandably so, because many of the Taliban leaders who were very close to Iran have been kept out of the power hierarchy by the Pakistanis. Now, I don't know whether it was only the Pakistanis or the Americans also put their seal of approval to whoever was chosen, because, the Americans think that the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda and the Haqqanis are the nice guys, the Iranians are the bad guys. If that is the calculation, then maybe the Americans were pretty okay with what has happened. But everybody who was close to Iran and everybody who was a little anti-Pakistan has been kept out of that rogues gallery which goes for the cabinet in Afghanistan.
So I get your point about, India not really needing Afghanistan as a trade partner, but can we really ignore this state which we do not share borders with, but is in our wider neighborhood, which has been known under the Taliban regime to try and foist violence within India's borders and completely sever whatever ties we've had with the people of Afghanistan over the last many decades? These are tough questions that will have to be listened to, looked at, and probably reveal the answers to over the next few weeks, months, and possibly years to come. Thank you so much, Sushant, for joining us today. That's a wrap on this episode of the India Development Debate. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. But for all the latest news, updates, and analysis, stay with ET Now.